everyone. I'm Rav. I just want to welcome you guys all here today. I'm the new development officer with the CCPA BC office, and this is Emma. Emma's new as well too. We're the two newbies. So it's really nice to meet you guys, and just want to thank you guys for supporting the CCPA and all the work that we do here. I also want to welcome everyone that is watching on Facebook Live today. Seth is going to be giving a short presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A afterwards as well. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Rav. Welcome to the folks watching on Facebook Live. My plan is to speak for 30 minutes and then open it for Q&A. And thank you all for being here. And I just want to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish First Nations. So I'm going to walk you through the case for pro-rep, proportional representation. And I'll begin just by telling you, I have been passionate about proportional representation since I was a teenager. I was odd as a teenager, maybe. You know, many of you here are supporters, and you've probably heard me say before, maybe many times, what it is we do at the CCPA, which is that we produce and promote research that aims to show people that our best values are possible. But in truth, I actually believe the issue of electoral reform and pro-rep and this referendum are key to achieving that. That this referendum is a chance to strengthen our democracy, to improve policy making, but just to blow open the scope of what's possible, to broaden the range of new ideas. And the way I describe it is, it's a chance to liberate us to vote our values. I think this referendum, which will run from the 22nd of October through to the end of November as a mail ballot, is an historic opportunity and one that we should not let slip away. So here's my plan with you this evening, is to walk you through, first of all, why is our current system, the first past the post system, messed up? How would pro-rep fix that? Then what's actually on the ballot? And I will walk you through the three options for reform that are on the ballot. And then close with how can those of us who are hoping for a yes outcome actually win this thing. So that's my plan. So first of all, why is our current system messed up? Exhibit A, sorry. I hate to do this to people. The projector is a little orangey, isn't it, in tint? But there you go, maybe it's appropriate. So here's the thing. Often we think of that before us as a question of something totally new and different. The truth is, pro-rep is the norm. And the system that we have, first past the post, is actually the exception. There's very few democracies that still use it. There's the United States, there's the UK, there's India and Pakistan, a few smaller former British colonies, and us. And there's this claim sometimes that you hear from the no side that, oh, if we switch, it will enable the far right and so on. Trump lost the popular vote and yet won the White House. And these alt-right elements live in the White House. The most recent Indian election saw the election of Modi in the BJP, which is a far-right Hindu nationalist government that won with 31% of the vote. And then we're getting there as well. So those are recent international examples, but Exhibit B would be the most recent Canadian example of Doug Ford, where we saw 40% of the popular vote go to the Conservatives, but 61% of the seats and 100% of the power. And by 100% of the power, we just saw that last week with the Ford government invoking the notwithstanding clause. So even when a government has 100% power, and you hope that one of the few checks on power is the courts, and it's being overruled. We call this problem with first past the post the problem of false majorities. Governments that win 100% of the power with less than 50% of the vote. So this is how it broke down in June in the last Ontario election. the proportional vote, the popular vote, was 40% to the Liberals, to the Conservatives, to Doug Ford's party, about a third to the NDP, just under 20% to the Liberals, closing in on 5% for the Greens. But this is the distribution of the seats. Okay, 61% majority to the Conservatives. The NDP got about their proportion, but the Liberals and the Greens substantially less than their share of the popular vote. This is the most recent federal election where Trudeau was elected with just under 40% of the vote and have 55% of the seats in the House of Commons. So another false majority, which means they really are able to choose with impunity which promises they will keep, which promises they will break. But I want to come back to Ontario for a second, because when I was listening to the punditry after the Ontario election in June, what I often heard was this: Ontarians voted for tax cuts. But hang on a second, 40% of them did. The majority of Ontarians actually voted for parties proposing exactly the opposite, which raises another problem with First Past the Post, which is the problem of false narratives. That the First Past the Post system produces a false narrative about who we are and our values. You see this played out in the BC political map. So these are the results from the last BC election, where the NDP won most of the seats on the coast and here in the Lower Mainland. The Liberals won almost all of the seats in the interior. And so it tells, the media repeat this story that, well, rural BC is more right-wing, more individualistic. Well, that's not true. That's not true. Half of them didn't vote for that. But the political map that First Past the Post produces tells this false story about us and our values. Now, I want to just quickly run through some recent BC history on our election results. First of all, the distortions of First Past the Post actually cut both ways. In 1996, the NDP lost the popular vote to the Liberals, but the Liberal vote was not as, what they say, efficiently distributed, and so the NDP won a false majority. 2001 is an interesting one. So 2001 was when Gordon Campbell was first elected. And it's actually the only time in the last half century that a governing party has won an outright majority of the popular vote. Gordon Campbell got 57% in that election. But many of you will remember what happened. With 57%, it was a wipeout. They won every seat in the province except 2 in East Vancouver, and the NDP lost official party status, and there was no official Her Majesty's loyal opposition. It's not healthy in a democracy to have a result like that. But I want to say one other thing about that, because again, as I've been debating people on the no side, one of the arguments that's frequently made is, oh, First Past the Post is better because it ensures local representation. Now, I remember, and some of you will remember as well, after that first Gordon Campbell election, he then instituted a series of major cuts to, there were school closures across the province and cuts to welfare and children and families and environment. And you started to see a kind of grassroots opposition emerge. I spent a lot of time traveling around the province between 2002 and 2005 giving talks. And over again, I kept hearing the same story. My MLA has locked their doors and will not take a meeting with their constituents. It didn't matter if you had a local MLA with an office down the street. Effectively, you didn't have local representation. Then 2005, 2009, 2013, the Liberals again win false majorities. It's the norm. Over and over again, First Past the Post produces these perverse outcomes that don't reflect our wishes. But here's another problem with First Past the Post, which is that it forces people to engage in what we call strategic voting. Strategic voting means not voting your values. Effectively, our elections become this two-party horse race, and the bandwidth of choice and political discourse is narrowed. And we feel forced to vote strategically not for what we want, but against what we most fear or dislike. That's not real choice. If you're a free market-oriented person, but frustrated with the BC Liberals, you've got nowhere to go except hold your nose or opt out. If you're a lefty voter, but you're frustrated with the NDP, you have nowhere to go but to suck it up or sit it out. First Past the Post limits real competition. I actually believe that's why so many party apparatchiks are on the no side, they like this system. It allows them to maintain control and discipline and not face that competition. But our ideas and our values are more diverse than that, and our democracy is healthier when more views and ideas are in play. Another problem with first past the post is the problem that we call wasted votes. And it plays out in a couple of ways. First of all, most of us live in what are called safe ridings, where the outcome is a foregone conclusion. And so a lot of people feel, why bother voting? It doesn't matter, and it's frankly hard to blame them. And consider this statistic I'm about to give you. In the last BC election, a year and a bit ago, of the 1.9 million votes that were cast, 1.1 million of them, well, over half, were cast towards a candidate who lost, often in close races. And the moment that happens, that vote disappears. It's wasted. It no longer finds political expression in any way. I am convinced that we can be more creative about how we think about our democracy, that we ought to be able to figure out a way for all of those votes to find their desired expression, which is what this is really about. On the policy front, first past the post also results in a problem that we call policy lurch, meaning as power and false majorities swing between two parties, each new government spends a chunk of their first year as essentially undoing the policies of the previous government, and so the pendulum goes. And if you want to see what I mean, look no further than what the Ford government in Ontario is doing, undoing the wind policies, or Obama being undone by Trump, or Trudeau reversing Harper. It's inefficient. It's actually bad for business. I mean, imagine if you're a green energy person in Ontario and you've invested millions of dollars only to have the Ford government undo the whole policy context on which your business was premised. In contrast, because the minority governments produced under first past the post require compromise across parties, they are more likely to produce policies that have broad appeal and stand the test of time. All told, it's my feeling that first past the post is having a negative effect on our faith in democracy, and that the disillusionment that results from what I just described means that many of us just don't bother voting. Within the OECD, Canada ranks 26th out of 34 countries when it comes to voter turnout. So I think we can do better than this antiquated electoral system that we've been using all of this time. I'm stealing some slides here from some young people with BC Youth for PR. So how would proportional representation fix what I just walked you through? So first of all, what is proportional representation? It's very simple, really. It's not a single system, but a principle. There are numerous forms or models of proportional representation, but they all have in common this. Very simply, the percent of the votes is reflected in the composition of the legislature. If you get 30% of the votes, you get 30% of the seats, etc. It's stable because it avoids the policy lurch that I just described to you. You have policies that are being made for the long term. And they're successful. 9 out of 10 of the top economies in the OECD use proportional representation. The United States is the only first past the post country in that top 10. Almost always, proportional representation produces minority outcomes. I think that's great. It forces cooperation. Parties have to put together governing alliances that in combination reflect the majority of voters. And if you want to know what that looks like, look no further than the government we have right now in BC, where we have an agreement between the NDP and the Greens. It's spelled out transparently in black and white in the confidence and supply agreement. A common argument against pro-rep is that it produces unstable governments that can't get anything done. Not true. Some of our nation's most popular and long-lasting policies, the Canada Pension Plan, old age security, Medicare itself, they are all a product of minority federal governments. And look what's happening in BC now, right? I mean, people can say different things and might have different beefs with the current government, but not being bold, I think, is not one of them. We're just getting the first new major social program of a generation in childcare. We have the first progressive property tax in North America. They are doing bold new things. So the notion that minority governments can't get things done or bring about new policy, I think, is nonsense. On a related point, PR produces more accountable government. I would contend, arguably, admittedly, that I actually believe that in the current minority BC government, the Greens are holding the NDP more to account than if the NDP had won a majority outright. That's my view. But it's deeper than that. If you only need 40% to win outright power, you don't need to concern yourself with the other 60. You're not accountable to the whole. I would argue, looking at the record of the last government, why did the last government feel that they could freeze welfare rates for 10 years? Why did they drag their feet for so long on the housing affordability crisis? I think it's because they made a calculation that the people most impacted weren't part of their 40%. The point is, when every vote counts, every vote matters. On the policy front, what we actually know from the evidence is that by many measures, PR countries produce better policy and have more caring societies. Arnd Leipart, the quote that this is from, the quote here on the slide, is a global political science authority on comparative electoral systems. And all of these studies that across the OECD compare PR countries versus what we call majoritarian systems like ours, are that the PR countries have less inequality, and the results there are highly statistically significant. Similarly, we know that the PR countries have stronger environmental policies. We're faster to adopt the Kyoto Protocol. Their share of global GHG emissions are on decline. We know that PR countries garner higher scores on the United Nations Index on Human Development, incorporating health, education, and standard of living indicators. Overall, the empirical evidence across the OECD countries shows that PR outperforms winner-take-all systems on measures of democracy, quality of life, income inequality, diversity among elected representatives, values of tolerance, environmental performance, and fiscal policy. I'm not saying these are all correlated, but the fear-mongering that's out there that somehow if we choose to change our system, everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket is simply not supported by the empirical evidence from other countries. We also know, again, clearly from the evidence, that under pro-rep systems, you tend to have more women elected to office, improved diversity in terms of racialized people, and indigenous representation. And that's because any system that's using either party lists or multi-member ridings, the parties would be strategically foolish not to present diverse groups of candidates, and so they don't. And the evidence is also clear across the OECD that voter turnout is about 7 percentage points higher under pro-rep, and for young people it's about 12 percentage points higher. And I think it just stands to reason when every vote counts and you're free to vote your values. All right, so that's my presentation about what's wrong with our system and how pro-rep would change it. I'm going to walk you now through what's actually on the ballot that we're going to be getting in our homes next month. So first of all, our ballots are going to have 2 questions. The first question is pretty straightforward and simple. Which system should British Columbia use for its provincial elections? Should we stick with first past the post or switch to a form of proportional representation? Pretty straightforward. The second question asks, if British Columbians choose in question 1 to switch to proportional representation, rank in order of preference your choice among these 3 alternatives. And I'm going to come back to them in a second, okay? But I want to point out that question 2 is optional. If people don't want to vote on question 2, they don't have to. Your ballot's not spoiled. You're welcome to just have an opinion on the first question. Conversely, if you vote for to keep first past the post in question 1, you're still allowed to weigh in and have an opinion on question 2, okay? I don't think it's that complicated. This is from Fair Voting BC. This is what the 2 questions look like if they were about dessert. What kind of dessert would you like? Would you like something from the old country like spotted dick, or something popular all over the world? And if something popular all over the world, rank your 3 choices down here. I don't think it's that complicated. So, how do the three options actually work? I'm going to walk you through the three systems now. The first one is called dual member. And under dual member, neighboring pairs of ridings will be combined into a single riding with 2 MLAs, except for large rural ridings that are already quite large. Okay? They'll be left as is. But in those dual member ridings, parties will nominate not 1 but 2 candidates in each of those ridings. And when you're voting, you vote for the team. The first seat in that riding will go to the candidate of the party with the most votes, just like we have now under first past the post. But the second seat would be allocated based on the popular vote. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we allocate all the first seats, based just like we do now. And then we look at the overall results and we say, okay, in order to have a legislature that's proportional, the Liberals need X number more seats, the NDP needs Y number more seats, the Greens need Z new seats, etc. And then we would look and see in which ridings did those parties perform the strongest, and they get their the second seat. Okay? And your ballot would look something like this. It's actually, of all of the systems, it's the simplest ballot, because it basically looks like our ballots today, except that parties are fielding 2 candidates instead of 1, and you're voting for the team rather than just 1. The second system is called mixed member. It's mixed because MLAs are elected in 2 ways. About 60% of MLAs would be elected just as they are now under first past the post, but in somewhat larger ridings. The ridings would increase by about 2/3 in size in order to make room for 40% of the MLAs who are elected from regional party lists. And we draw from the regional party lists in order to produce a makeup of the legislature that reflects the popular vote. And so a ballot under mixed member would look something like this. It would have 2 parts. The first part is your local riding vote. It's just like it is now. But in your second vote, is your regional vote where you're voting for a party, and it remains to be determined whether or not people, as you see here, would have the option of saying, well, within the party, here's the person I like. So the Attorney General has said that would be determined afterwards if this is the most popular choice. The parties would all say, well, here's our regional list. And either it would be party ranked, or the voter would be empowered to rank, to basically choose which candidate they most liked. Notably in this system, none of the ridings would be larger than they are under federally right now. Okay. The third and final one is rural-urban. And under rural-urban, it actually combines 2 PR systems. Rural areas would vote using mixed member, which is the system I just showed you. But for the majority of us who live in cities and suburbs, we would vote using STV, the single transferable vote, which is the same system that the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform recommended and that we voted on in the referendums in 2005 and in 2009. So in those rural ridings, they would be combined into larger ridings with 4 to 7 MLAs each. Sorry?
You said in the rural.
Sorry, in the urban ridings. Thank you for correcting me. In the urban ridings, it would be 4 to 7 MLAs. So for example, here in Vancouver, there's currently 11 or 12 MLAs in the city proper of Vancouver. That would be compressed into 2 or 3 ridings, and each of those ridings would have 4 to 7 MLAs. Your ballot under in those urban areas under STB would look something like this. So let's say there's 4 candidates in this particular riding. The parties field their candidates. Sorry, with 4, every party would field 4, not 3. And you can choose, and you rank as many or as few as you want. Notably, what's interesting about this is the system that sort of maximizes voter choice, in the sense that the individual voter gets to decide within each party's list of candidates, here's who I most like, etc. And you can mix it up. you could say, I really like this person in Party A, but I also, my next choice would be this person in Party B. And this is the system that is most likely to be the one where an independent could win. Why is that? Because if each riding is going to have 4 to 7 seats, you basically need between 15 and 25% to win one of those seats. And so if you're an independent who doesn't have the party brand but has a strong local base, you have a better chance of actually winning one of those seats. But every MLA would still be accountable to a local riding in this system. And the point with this one too is, but not just this one, you're likely to have MLAs, you're going to have MLAs who are geographically close to you, but you're also going to have nearby MLAs with whom you feel you have some sort of political affinity. Unlike the scenario I told you about in 2000, after 2001, when you might have had to drive 2 days to find an MLA who shared your political affinity. I want to say this about all 3 of the options. All 3 of the options are, in fact, I would say, a huge improvement over what we have now. They all produce a proportional outcome reflecting what we actually vote for. It is my contention that all of them not only preserve but actually enhance local representation, because not only do you still have every MLA accountable to a riding or at least a region, but you're going to also have that nearby political affinity as well. They all improve the diversity of the legislature. They all ensure that no region will have fewer MLAs than they currently do. Even with mixed member, and this is kudos to the Attorney General on this. They have mixed member in Germany and they have it in New Zealand, but usually the list candidates are for the whole country or the whole province. But Dave Eby said, we're going to have regional lists. So even the list MLAs will be accountable to a region. They're all, in that way, they're all innovative made in BC models that reflect our unique needs and geography. None of them will result in significantly more seats in the legislature. In fact, the regulation caps that at 8 new seats. They all include a minimum threshold of 5%. So a party has to secure 5% or more to get a seat. And if anyone's still feeling nervous, there's one other, I think, very important piece of the regulation that the Attorney General brought in, which is this fail-safe road test, if you will, an escape clause, which is that he has said there will be a second confirmation referendum after 2 election cycles. We actually get to try it out, because one of the things that happens with this debate, no matter how much information people have and so on, it's all a little theoretical, right? We know what we know until we experience something different. And so with this, if we choose to change, we get to try it out for 2 election cycles, and then there will be another referendum. And if people don't like it, they can choose to go back. But I'm not aware of any country that has chosen to go back. But I think it's a useful fail-safe. Most democracies in the world use some form of PR, and yet we're somehow told this is too complicated. I don't think British Columbians are stupider than all of these good people. But it's also because most democracies use PR, it's fairly easy for people on the no side to cherry pick examples and fearmonger about them, pointing to individual countries facing some challenge and pinning that on the electoral system when it has nothing to do with the electoral system. And there are the no side in particular is trying to make this argument that PR will enable far-right parties. I gave you the examples off the top of Trump and Modi, Doug Ford. Look, no electoral system has a monopoly on either preventing or fostering far-right parties. And those advancing claims to the contrary are just cherry-picking examples. It's my view that if you really want to know what's behind the rise of the far right, look at the economic policies. Look at the austerity and the inequality that's driving it. Or in the case, there's obviously some very distressing stuff happening in Europe right now. They are facing the largest refugee crisis since the Second World War. Layered on top of that, years of austerity that's created this toxic stew of racist anti-immigrant backlash. But a lot of those parties are gaining inspiration from the election of Donald Trump under first past the post. What do we need to do to win? First of all, people need to vote, and we need to get out the vote. It's really about talking to your friends, your family, your coworkers. I really encourage people to send a personal email to everyone in your network, all your friends and family and coworkers, that says, the election's coming, I'm voting yes, here's why, and encourage them to do something similar. Host or give a talk. This PowerPoint, I'm happy to share with anybody, and you can make it your own and give it yourself. Write letters to the editors, call into the call-in shows. There's so much great stuff on social media now to share that's being produced by Fair Vote and other groups. Donate to the Yes campaign. Volunteer, canvas with phone banks and so on. These are all groups that are doing that. So we have a handout that we're going to give all of you of these slides, but these are the links for Fair Vote, for Vote PRBC, which is the main proponent group, coalition that we're a part of. Lead Now, Fair Vote BC. They're all looking for volunteers. And this is the special website we've created on our blog, policynote.ca, where we've amalgamated all of our PR stuff. So if you want to just give the link to friends and family with a single link where you can find everything we've produced, it's all there. ProRep in some incentivizes parties to make decisions together, gathering the input and expertise of one another to build long-lasting policies to urgent problems that can't just be undone for partisan purposes by the next government, because they are designed with the majority in mind. There are many, many reasons to vote yes. I think we deserve a democracy where we get to vote for the representatives we want and not strategically against the ones we most fear, and that we deserve to be liberated to vote our values and to feel safe knowing that our votes aren't wasted. And under PR, that will be the new normal. And for those who worry about PR enabling the far right or producing too much uncertainty, I say, trust the values of British Columbians. You know, we don't know exactly what things will look like under ProRep. You can't just superimpose the results of a past election under a new system because it's transformative. But I think I trust the values of British Columbians enough to believe very firmly that whatever that outcome looks like, it's going to serve us very well. Thanks. And now I'm happy to take your questions. Sean?
Okay, I'll just be blunt. It seems very complicated.
The three systems?
Yeah, and I think that's gonna be, my understanding of voting these days is people don't go and vote after sustained, engaged education of themselves about the policy and the platforms.
So, I mean, this is why I emphasize that you don't have to vote on the second question if you don't want to. My feeling is it takes about half an hour to delve into the three systems and get a really firm handle on them. I don't think that's asking too much. It is tough to ask people to do that. I get that. There were some who felt that the Attorney General should have recommended just a single question. You know, do you want to keep the current system or switch to a system of ProRep? And there's a legitimate argument for a question like that. I think the public would not have been happy with that because they're not prepared to entrust politicians to say, we'll switch to the principle of ProRep and leave it to you to decide what form that takes. I think the people want to have their say over what form we get, and that does take a little homework. Nancy?
Who will decide of the three subsystems once the vote is in? How is the choice between those three models made?
So your second question on the ballot is a ranked ballot.
Yeah.
So you choose my first choice, my second choice, my third choice,
Yeah.
and it functions like a preferential ballot. So
Whatever no matter how small the proportion of people who actually make a choice, it will rule.
that will be the outcome. If on the first question,
Yeah.
the first question has to get a majority saying we want to change.
Is it a simple majority?
It is a majority of 50% plus one. I think that makes sense. people may remember that in 2005, we had a referendum on the recommendation of the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform for the single transferable vote. It got 58%. But the government then had set the threshold at 60%. And so it didn't pass. And ever since, people have felt a little robbed, which is why we find ourselves here today. Both the NDP and the Greens ran saying they were going to have this referendum. Actually, the Greens ran saying we should just do it. The NDP said we're going to have a referendum. So I think the mandate is there to do it. And I think people should take comfort from this second confirmation referendum. This is why I think that may actually be the key here. It's true, you know, to Shauna's earlier point, the systems are all a little complicated. They all have elements of unknowns where we're going to have to wait. We're going to have to entrust the independent election boundaries commission to figure out some of the maps and so on. And then we just get to try it out in practice, so it's not theoretical. And if it doesn't work for us, we can choose to switch back. So I think that makes sense to me. But back to your very first question. So with the rankings, so if one of those gets 50% right out of the gate, like that, more than 50% of the people who answer chose it as their first choice, it wins. If none of the three get 50% on the first round of voting, then the third choice, the least popular, would get knocked off, and those votes would get reassigned, and then in the next round, one of them would have 50%. So it works like any ranked ballot that way. Yes?
If single transferable vote got 58% in the previous referendum, how come it's not on the list now?
Oh, yeah, thank you for raising that, and I meant to make this point. So, single transferable vote is on the ballot in rural urban for the majority of us who live in urban settings. One of the, I think, legitimate critiques of the single transferable vote is that it didn't work great for rural ridings. That under STV, rural ridings would become too large. Like for those, and what I quite like about the rural-urban option is it fixes that. So for us in Vancouver here, you know, combining 4 or 5 ridings into one, it's really not a big deal. It's another 10 minutes on the bus, right? But if you're in a large rural riding, combining 4 ridings into one makes it mammoth. And so with the rural-urban option, most of us get STV, but for those who live in large rural ridings, instead of their ridings having to become 4 times larger, they only become 2/3 larger. Really, they'll end up the same size as they are federally, more or less. So actually, I actually think the rural-urban is quite an innovative fix to one of the deficiencies of STV.
I have 2 questions about the rural-urban. What is rural and what is urban? So what happens to towns, small towns like Smithers and Nelson and so on? That's one question. And the second thing is, what does the rural ballot look like in a rural-urban? You only had the urban ballot there.
Right, because the rural ballot would be mixed member. So it was the ballot I showed you before. So the rural ballot would look like this under mixed member, where you would just have the 2 votes in your riding and then the regional list. And in the urban ridings, it would look like this under STV. In terms of, you know, what it would look like, it's going to be based on that geographic footprint of a riding. So, you know, Prince George, Kamloops, and so on, they're big enough. They can use STV and count as urban. But in those ridings where the geographic footprint of the riding is already very large, it would use mixed member. And I think the truth is some of that is going to be thrown to Elections BC or the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission to figure out after the vote.
maybe I shouldn't be asking you this, but do you feel that there is one that is preferable? In terms of democracy, in terms of
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you would consider the one that would most reflect our shared values?
I've been asked a number of times now, not just today, how I'm going to rank. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you privately how I'm going to do it, not on the Facebook Live. And I say that for this reason. In our submission to the Attorney General, we recommended a dual question ballot like this because we thought that British Columbians themselves should get to choose which system, and I'm happy to leave that choice. And it's not even so much that one's better for democracy. The truth is, each of the three systems has their strengths and weaknesses, and it matters a bit what's important to you. So if it's vital to you that every single MLA be accountable to a local riding, not just a regional riding, but a local riding, well then maybe you like dual member. If it's particularly important to you that independents should have an easier time getting in, well then you probably like STV under rural urban. So everyone's got to weigh those things. I think people need to spend half an hour delving into the pros and cons of each and deciding, and I'm happy to tell you privately how I'm doing. Yeah, Kate?
Thank you, Jennifer. I've got many good ideas now, and a lot of my questions have been answered, but I do, you mentioned independence, and I have a question about that. In this city, we're facing a municipal election with lots of independents. I don't know if that will ever happen provincially, but I'd be curious on your thoughts on the impact of this seems very party-driven, and what does that say about the chances for independence in the future under what it is?
So I don't actually believe these options are more party-driven, particularly because we have so many safe seats right now. You know, so for example, so last week I debated Suzanne Anton at the Surrey Board of Trade, and I made this point. I live in East Vancouver in one of the safest NDP ridings in the country, one of the two that stayed NDP in 2001. She lives in Kerrisdale in one of the safest Liberal ridings in the province. In both cases, those two parties, you know, with all due respect to their MLAs, could pretty much field anyone, and they're going to win. Which is why. So what ends up happening, the real pitched battle, is the battle for the nomination, and a handful of party members decide who the nominee is, and once they do, the seat's theirs. That's how our current system works. In many ridings. With these, it's still the case under dual member that the parties are going to go through a process very similar to what they do now, deciding in their local nomination races who their two candidates are, but also independents can also decide to run. Under mixed member, the first part of the local ballot's just like now. It's the same. The parties will choose who their candidates are. But if we end up with what's called the open ballot for the second part, and this is one where we don't know yet, it would be determined afterwards. It's not the party that's super empowered, it's the voter. The voter would get to say, so the party A says, here's our list of candidates in this region, but the voter will get to say, well, of the candidates you're saying, this is the one I most like. If we get open, I'm going to be if this ends up winning the referendum, I'm going to be out there lobbying for open. I like open because it actually gives more power to the voters. And under STV, the individual voter has way more power than the parties than currently, because the parties are fielding their candidates, but it's the individual voter who's empowered to rank them exactly how they want, including the independents. I lost track of who was next.
I'm curious about how how anyone, if anyone, is introducing this model to our young people who will soon vote. They may not vote in this election, but this is going to be a whole sea change for them. And we do have mock elections in schools as time goes on, even for 10-year-olds. So is there a movement afoot to help young folks kind of grapple with that?
I mean, I would be shocked as a former social science teacher if schools weren't doing mock referendums in their schools. I suspect many of them are. In fact, I actually have heard that one of the major organizations that does those mock elections is running that, and that they'll be very engaged. I showed you a bunch of slides from this BC Youth for PR. The slides are all done by a 16-year-old kid on Salt Spring, actually. So you've got young people engaged there. I've also shown you a slide that, again, empirically, we know that youth voter turnout goes up by 12 percentage points under PR. And for the main coalition that's on the yes side, a big chunk of their resources are going towards campus-based campaigning. So focus particularly on post-secondary students in this referendum.
Who are the anti-PR forces? Who are the bigwigs in that process thus far?
Well, so the no organization, that the official opponent group is three people who formed it are Bill Thielman and Suzanne Anton and Bob Plekis, the former civil servant. So a very interesting political combination. But, you know, and I don't want to disparage people. I think people, you know, they all come to their preference for first past the post honestly. That said, as I watch this debate unfolding, some seem prepared to say just about anything in defense of the no side, like all kinds of crap getting thrown against the wall to see what sticks. And a lot of fear-mongering. But I think part of the impulse, you know, ironically, back to your point, there's this critique that proportional representation, you know, gives more power to the backroom party people. But all the people saying that are backroom party people. I'm not. And I think, and I alluded to why I think that is. I think the current system works well. If you're a hardcore partisan and you don't want to have to compete with 5 or 6 parties, you're basically happy to have this 2-horse race where every few years you get your kick at the can and 100% of the power. That works for some people. It doesn't work for me. And I think it turns a lot of people off. But I think we're healthier with more of that choice. Again, you know, when I was debating Suzanne Anton at the Surrey Board of Trade last week, I said it was a business audience, so I said, look, you purport to be all about choice and competition. You think that choice and competition makes for a healthier economy. By what logic do you think the same does not hold true for our politics?
And what did she say?
Nothing. Sheila.
I think that going back to the first point, she's gone now. I think the most difficult thing is going to get people to actually mail in their ballot on the first question.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I think we have to present some more positive examples than all to counter the fear mongering. But I freely admit it's going to be tough. I'm equally interested in what everyone here is thinking or hearing from their circle of friends.
Mm-hmm.
Later on. But the other point, one of the advantages that you didn't maybe talk about, that I think we need is the creating some airspace for new novel ideas. Because so many people that I know, all the progressive friends I know are, you know, we have a new idea and you go to a politician, an electoral politician, and it's yes, but. We're so tired of the buts.
Mm-hmm.
And there's never any really novel ideas that grab people's imagination,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I think this system would be so refreshing and changing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's where I started. I strongly believe that pro-rep means a broadening of the ideas in play. And this is the thing, if it's a two-party race, it's the parties that just get to decide, you know, who they need to listen to in some calculation. The more variety there is out there, the individual who's got a new idea can say, has more parties to go to with it. You can start your own party with it, and more leverage in a way. And I think we're seeing that now with a minority government, that things become possible that weren't possible before. And I agree with your other point, though, that I think a key piece of this is getting out the vote. And all of us animating our own networks, and lots of groups animating their own base to say this matters, make sure you mail in your ballot. Don't get too hung up over the three models. If you don't want to spend half an hour, mail it in with the first question, but mail in your ballot. It's right here.
Is a ranked ballot the same as single transferable vote? Ranked?
No. Well, so single transferable vote is a form of ranked ballot, but so ironically, the second question on the ballot is a ranked ballot, right? Like, it's saying here's three choices, rank your preferences. But in a ranked or preferential ballot, you're still trying to produce a single winner, right? So for example, France has, well, they actually have runoff elections for president, but Australia uses a ranked ballot for their lower house. So you're ranking your choices, but only one wins. But in the single transferable vote, you're still ranking your choices, but 4 to 7 win, right? And that's the point around liberating ourselves from this winner-takes-all system that we have now. Whether it's first past the post or ranked, in a legislature of 87 seats, you don't have to have just one winner. There's room for multiple winners in order to give expression to what people actually want.
And that's why you need larger ridings.
You need somewhat larger ridings to make room for those list MLAs, unless you were like going to double the size of the legislature, but they don't want to do that. And so that's why you have to somewhat increase the riding. Traditionally, when we think about the ranked ballot, so Trudeau, in rejecting having promised electoral reform and then breaking that promise, which you can do when you have a false majority, the Liberals traditionally federally like the preferential ballot because you still produce a single winner and it kind of gravitates to everyone's second choice, which if you're a federal Liberal is great because you're sort of everyone's second choice. And so they like that system. But it isn't, so in fact, a preferential or ranked ballot does not produce a proportional outcome. In fact, it's more likely to produce long-time false majority outcomes.
So the ballot to October?
So October 22nd, so right after the municipal elections, is the voting period begins through to the end of November. Yes?
So some people who are opposed will point out that recently they are aware that, say in Germany, it's taken months to pull together a coalition government. And this is the rub that some people will use. What would be your answer?
I mean, so this is the example of some of the cherry picking that goes on there. So, I mean, Germany has had PR for a century. Right now, they're in an interesting moment where it took some time to form government. But the sky doesn't fall, you know. Like, remember last summer, a year ago, when we had our results, and we all remember, right? It was like 60 days when we didn't know who was really going to be government. It was all very entertaining. But the institutions of government continued. There were major forest fires. The ministers, the outgoing ministers remained the ministers. They did the job of government. The sky doesn't fall. And then we got the transition. Mostly I hear the no side pointing to Northern Ireland right now, which has gone a very long time without a government, but not without a government. Again, the institutions of government continue to function. There's no elected clarity there. But, you know, we're not Northern Ireland. the Northern Ireland situation, for 18 years they've had a power sharing arrangement between two extremist parties, right? The DUP and Sinn Féin, and it's broken down over a political scandal that's left them unable to figure out who's going to govern. It's not going to happen here. The political culture of British Columbia is not going to change just because of the change in the vote. And for every Northern Ireland, you can point to dozens of countries for whom this has functioned just fine for a very long time. Back to the Germany example again. It's interesting. After World War II, the Allies could have chosen to institute any form of electoral system they wanted. And notably, the US and the UK deliberately and consciously chose not to institute their own systems on post-war Germany, but they chose PR for Germany. And if you don't think they did that with an eye to how they wanted to make sure that there would not be a historical repeat, I highly doubt that.
What role does the government, can the government have, or are they having in promoting or supporting this referendum?
Well, I mean, so Elections BC will have the biggest budget, right? They're going to produce neutral information for voters. Everyone's going to get something in their mail at home from Elections BC saying, here's how the ballot works and here's how the three systems work. So that's good. As for the parties themselves, I mean, the NDP and the Greens are obviously campaigning in favor of the yes side. I've seen them both producing stuff and giving speeches and stuff in favor of the yes side. But frankly, I actually think we don't want too much of that. I mean, part of people don't want this to be about parties. They want this to be about a different kind of system. So I think it actually falls more to us to win this thing.
I'm from the Republic of Ireland, and I mean, there's a lot of other countries, and I do say to people, if people in Ireland can do it, anybody can do it. So you say with Italy or wherever, I mean, this is like not rocket science, right? I mean, and there's lots of countries that do it. So, I'm not an Irish woman who takes offense to somebody saying the Irish can do it, anybody can do it. It's like, come on.
Yeah. So most democracies have done this. When I debated Suzanne Anton last week, she opened with the most recent election results in Sweden, which were very distressing. The far right in Sweden won 17% of the vote. And she said they now have the balance of power. Hold on a minute, they don't have the balance of power. They may, we'll have to wait and see. I suspect they won't, that's my guess. In the Netherlands, the far right party there also won 17% of the vote. But the main influence that they have had is to encourage cooperation among all the other parties to keep them isolated. And in Sweden, often we have these theoretical debates about the electoral system. Again, look at the policies. That's the reflection of our values. There is an anti-immigrant backlash happening in Sweden. It's distressing. But look what's happened. Like, we had a big raging debate in Canada over whether or not we would take 25,000 Syrian refugees. Sweden, with a population less than a third Canada's, has taken 300,000 refugees since 2015. I think we're in a very poor position to offer morality lessons to Sweden about tolerance. So we'll see. We've hit our time limit. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you to the people on Facebook Live who stuck it in for the whole hour. And we can still talk a little bit more informally. Rav has handouts of the slides, if you'd like. And if somebody actually wants the slideshow, we'll give that to you as well, like electronically, and you can give your own presentation. Thanks, everybody.